Hi there. Welcome to the Renew Wisconsin Renewable Energy Summit. My name is Heather Allen. I'm Executive Director of Renew Wisconsin, and I'm very excited to see you all joining us this morning. We're really honored to have you here at the 10th Annual Renew Wisconsin Energy Summit, our first ever virtual summit. So beginning today, Tuesday, January 12th, the summit will take place over the course of 3 days, presented by Arch Electric, Green Penny, and Invenergy. The theme of this year's event, Building the Clean Energy Mosaic, will highlight the diversity of technologies, people, and scale needed to shape our clean energy future. I'd like to take a moment to recognize the history of the land. I live on land and in a community in Madison, Wisconsin that was stolen from Ho-Chunk Nation, and I recognize the privilege that I experience is because of that action. And while I cannot reverse the past, I can help shape the future. And I look forward to working with our Native nations to ensure the work that we do reflects their generations of land and natural resources stewardship. We have an amazing lineup of speakers and a virtual event space offering one-on-one meetings, virtual exhibitor booths, and daily interactive industry conversations. There's a short video tutorial you can see here on your screen that will help you engage with exhibitors and other attendees available on the Summit webpage. Just click on the My Summit in the top right corner drop-down menu, and then click on the virtual event space tutorial. You can also see the link to this in the chat. If at any time you have questions or technical issues during the event, please call Nonprofit Learning Lab at their tech support number, which you can see here on the screen, and it is available on the Summit webpage. A reminder that all programming, with the exception of the industry sessions, will be available on demand. You can access programming that you missed or you'd like to revisit by returning to the event hub and clicking View Session. We will send attendees an email when on-demand videos are posted. Also on the Summit webpage, you will find 3 red boxes labeled the 2020 Year in Review, the 2020 Renewable Energy Awards, and the 2020 Renewable Energy Stories. These are video presentations prepared by our own Michael Vickerman and Sam Deniski, highlighting the very exciting developments in renewable energy this last year. So I encourage you to check those out when you have time between sessions, and to look at the other opportunities to learn and connect on our event page. And please do save the date. On May 23rd, 2021, Renew Wisconsin will host its annual bike ride to tour renewable energy sites in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. This event will be presented by Xcel Energy. This summit would not be possible without our sponsors. And so please join me in thanking our sponsors, and I will be supported by our communications intern, Morgan Kamholz, in recognizing our sponsors today. Our presenting sponsors are Arch Electric, Green Penny, and Invenergy.
Thank you to our partner sponsors, Alliant Energy, CED Green Tech, Eagle Point Solar, Madison College, SC Johnson, Northwind Solar, Stantec, Wisconsin Office of Energy Innovation, and Xcel Energy.
Thank you to our leader sponsors, Applied Ecological Services, Bolt, Carlson Electric, Endries Solar and Electric, NG North America, Focus on Energy Aptum, Foley and Lardner, Full Spectrum Solar, Madison Gas and Electric Foundation, National Grid, Sunvest Solar, Werner Electric, Westwood, Wyderk, and WPPI Energy.
Thank you to our champion sponsors, Dane County Office of Energy and Climate Change, Eland Electric, Mars EOR, Good Steward Consulting, Capur and Associates, Keys and Fox, Legacy Solar Cooperative, One Energy, Organic Valley, Ranger Power, Steigerwalt Land Services, Strategic Economic Research, Sunbadger Solar, TRC, Wisconsin Academy of Sciences, Arts and Letters, and Wisconsin Building Trades Council.
And thank you to our advocate sponsors, Apex Clean Energy, Braun Intertech, Broadwind, Chad's Design Build, City of Madison, City of Milwaukee, Milwaukee Shines, Clean Fuel Partners, Couillard Solar Foundation, Dairyland Power Cooperative, Energy Law Wisconsin, the Environmental Law and Policy Center, GDS Associates, Gunderson Health Systems, HGA Architects and Engineers, McKinstry, Midwest Solar Power, Northeast Wisconsin Technical College, Olson Solar Energy, PACE, PRC Wind, Stonehouse Development, Sustain Dane, UW Platteville, Wisconsin Health Professionals for Climate Action, and the Wisconsin Sustainable Business Council. Thank you to all our sponsors, and thank you, Morgan. We would now like to spotlight Cooper Johnson from Invenergy, today's presenting sponsor, for a brief address. Cooper Johnson is a Senior Associate for Renewable Energy Development at Invenergy LLC, headquartered in Chicago. Invenergy develops, owns, and operates large-scale renewable and other clean energy generation and storage facilities worldwide, including a number of Wisconsin projects under construction and development, including the Badger Hollow Solar Farm, the Paris Solar Farm, and the Forward Wind Energy Center, which has been generating power since 2008, and many more. Thank you, Cooper.
Thank you, Heather. Really appreciate that intro here. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm honored to be here to deliver this address. Hope everybody can see. All right. So again, thank you and good morning. My name is Cooper Johnson. As Heather mentioned, I'm a senior project developer with Invenergy. Really honored to deliver this address to everyone attending the Renew Conference, the 10th Annual Renewable Energy Summit. Heather, Michael, Jody, and the rest of the Renew team have put together an outstanding program. I'm super excited to learn from the panels and keynote speakers Renew's organized for this first ever virtual summit event, and glimpse into the future of renewables in Wisconsin from the people who've helped get us here today. But before we look ahead, I first want to offer a personal retrospective I hope captures just how far we've come in the past decade. I've had the great privilege of working with many of you, and I'm truly inspired to see our visions unfold. My introduction to the industry was circuitous. In late 2010, I abandoned a career in Chicago politics to follow my father, Steve, into the solar industry. He connected me with Steve Ostrenga and John Kivlin, the founders of Helios Solar Works, who offered me an opportunity that would transform my life. Nearly 10 years ago to the day, Helios's first production module was rolling off the assembly line I just built. In the subsequent 2 years at our 36 megawatt plant, 36 megawatts, I had the privilege of connecting with folks who'd later become colleagues, mentors, and friends. I proudly loaded made in Milwaukee panels into the backs of Lagerman heating and cooling trucks, trailers guided by Arch Electric's Ed Zinthofer, and vans driven by then Peeper Electric Nick Mathis, now at MREA. I manned our booth in Custer at the MREA fair in 2011, where I first met Michael Vickerman, Michelle Hittman, and Commissioner Tyler Huebner. I met my wife Luce at Helios and started a solar-grown family. Ultimately, our startup succumbed to the incredible downward market pressures typified in the past decade. Equipment costs have reduced an astonishing 90% since 2010. And while these dramatic cost declines have contributed to the growth our businesses enjoy today, they forced Helios to shut our doors in fall of 2013. At that time, Wisconsin's largest solar array was a 1 megawatt installation in Jefferson, Wisconsin. Fun fact, it will take you and your cousin 6 hours to clear snow from a megawatt of solar on a minus 40-degree day in 2 to 3 feet of drifted snow. I know this because after Helios, I spent the balance of the decade riding the solar coaster in Wisconsin. I earned valuable experience maintaining and installing solar arrays with Convergence Energy and Arch Electric. I crawled around on a roof with Russ Andrews with Arch Electric. I directed solar supply chains with my former Helios colleague, Angie Domagalski at Simple Ray. She's also at Arch Electric now. And managing after sales and wind and solar technicians at Inga Team. My wind crews serviced Invenergy generators across the US for several years before my childhood friend and director of their environmental strategy team, Andrea Giampoli, helped me get my foot in the door. As Invenergy's Wisconsin development portfolio expanded, they saw fit to put my experience to work north of the cheese curtain, developing utility scale projects in the Badger State. For the past 18 months, I've been supporting our ambitious vision for Wisconsin's clean energy future. MISO's interconnection study queue now has over 7,500 megawatts of active solar positions in Wisconsin. Invenergy led the utility scale charge here with our 300 megawatt Badger Hollow solar project, now under construction in Iowa County. Last month, the Public Service Commission approved Paris Solar, a 200 megawatt project in Kenosha County. And our 250 megawatt Darien Solar Energy Center in Walworth and Rock counties and 300 megawatt Koshkonong Solar Energy Center in Dane County are under the same scrutiny with the Public Service Commission today. Invenergy's Wisconsin portfolio and all the solar projects everyone here is managing promise to bring thousands of jobs to our state and billions in revenue, driving a green economic transformation. Homes and businesses are adopting solar at an incredible pace, while greenfield projects bolster our state's proud working farmer families. This long overdue transformation is finally here and is in no small part reflective of the efforts of Renew Wisconsin. Renew's forwarded an agenda of building a stronger, healthier, more vibrant Wisconsin through their advocacy, education, and collaboration, and are central to the state's growth. In closing, to all the hardworking folks I've collaborated with here today and to those I've yet to meet, let's enjoy our turn in the sun. Welcome. Enjoy Ms. Kelly Spees-Backman.
Thank you so much, Cooper. That's a wonderful retrospective. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Kelly Spees-Backman, CEO of the Energy Storage Association. She is a former commissioner of the Maryland Public Service Commission who has spent more than 20 years working on energy and environmental issues in the public, NGO, and private sectors. She currently serves on the executive committee of the Board of the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership and the external advisory board of Georgia Tech's Strategic Energy Institute. We are very pleased to have her here to tell us about the latest in energy storage. Kelly.
Thanks, Heather. I'm thrilled to be here. And I just wanted to say how impressed I was with your introduction with the Wisconsin land privilege recognition. I was really moved by that. I just wanted to give you street cred for that. Thank you. And Cooper, your presentation was really a lot of fun, I have to say. I am pretty sure we know some of the same people in that solar coaster of 2010 and such. Let me just get my slides up here now. Sharing, going back, and there we go. So hi, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what's going on with energy storage recently in the US and in specifically in some of the states, and what we're looking forward to even beyond 2021. We are entering, certainly to say the least, quite an interesting new phase of energy storage and renewables with the next administration coming in and with this Congress. And sorry for my dog barking. I thought he was out of the room. A little bit about Energy Storage Association. We are the National Association for Energy Storage in all its forms. So that is not just the battery storage that you read about in the newspapers, but we also represent companies who participate in storage technologies like mechanical and pumped hydro and thermal storage. I'll talk a little bit about the different technologies that are available a little later in the slides. We have about 210 members right now, definitely over 200 members. We're in membership drive, so that number's growing, we're excited to say. We work at the federal, state, and the RTO ISO level to really, what we say is we accelerate markets, we connect our members, and we educate stakeholders. In the accelerating markets, we work both on the regulatory and the legislative side specifically in states, as well as in markets, and as well as at the federal level. With respect to connecting our members, we work we put on some pretty awesome events, including now virtual events, which I never thought I'd be able to do. But now we all know all the platforms that are out there, and we're dealing with it just as Heather's doing. We also connect our members to policymakers through networking events in DC and in the States as well. On the education front, we really work to make sure that folks understand the importance of energy storage and its role in a modernized grid at the legislative, so for legislators, for regulators, for safety officials, and for advocates. So a little bit more about energy storage. My, energy storage is a critical hub for the entire grid. I love the theme of this year's conference having to do with a mosaic, because really, when you think about energy storage, it really is kind of part of a mosaic of a full grid scale, or I should say grid composition. We help, of course, solar and wind to be more flexible and more dispatchable. We also help with the flexibility and the ramping ability of centralized generation that already exists and is already invested in. We help with electric vehicle transportation and transportation, really sort of providing power to fleet vehicles, for example, at night when the power grid isn't running at its top peak amount. And then we help to make the grid really more efficient in terms of increasing the capacity factors of existing generation sources, as well as upgrading and making more efficient distribution and transportation grids. So ultimately, we say that storage is a little bit like bacon. It makes everything a little bit better. A little bit about industry progress. Woo, this is serious. So if you look at that 2020 estimate, we more than doubled our installed base. I should say almost doubled our installed base in just 1 year, up to, from about 2015 to 2019, there were about 1,500 megawatts total installed. A third of that was behind the meter, and about a third of that behind the meter was, or is, I should say, residential. Now, I will let you know that this is specifically for battery storage installations, these numbers from Wood Mackenzie and the US Energy Storage Association. So up until 2019, we had about 1,500 megawatts on the grid. In 2020, in the midst of a pandemic, we put in 1,275 megawatts of storage on the grid. Now, I will say it's not what we expected before we went into the pandemic. We were expecting to triple our market, but we are well on our way. If you think of the storage market similar to what the solar market was maybe 10 years ago, that hockey puck, we are right at the ankle of that hockey puck, the hockey stick. We're at 1,275 installed just this year, and our expectations for next year are 3 times that, at more than 3,700 megawatts of just the battery storage next year. It's pretty exciting. Sorry about that. Am I out of screen? Am I out of the, there we go. So 2020, as I mentioned, was record growth. You can see the quarterly reports from 2013 out to 2020. In the second quarter, the next to last report that came out from Wood Mackenzie, we had 168 megawatts, which was the strongest Q2 on record. And then in the third quarter, when things started really kind of normalizing to still being in the pandemic, but at least normalizing to function, we shattered all records, 476 megawatts in 1 quarter. About 2/3 of that was front of the meter, and about a third of that was behind the meter storage. In 2020, as I said, we expect to do, the numbers haven't come in yet, but we're very close to understanding that we will have put in about 1,275 megawatts. And by the end of the year, just this year, we had $1.5 billion invested in projects. So what's going on with this? Why is storage so attractive? I mentioned a little bit earlier that there are multiple technologies, of course. There's the mechanical storage, thermal storage, pumped hydro storage. The mechanical storage includes compressed air energy storage, flywheels, even the gravity storage, where kind of you just basically use the very basic elements of weight to store energy. In the thermal area, there's of course pumped heat storage, liquid air energy storage, and hot water heaters. I mean, if you think about that, really at its most basic element, energy storage is simply taking the energy that you have and storing it for a later time, for when you need it most. And so hot water heaters are considered storage applications as well. Another reason why storage is so attractive is that it's become very cost effective. In the last 5 years, lithium ion battery storage projects installed have come down 65% in cost. The soft costs are just beginning to come down as we're coming to, these scales of storage projects. People are learning a lot more about how to standardize and how to optimize the installed cost. And the third thing is why this is so attractive is really there are multiple value streams for multiple players in this in the grid. And I'll go into that in just a little bit. These are just a few examples. I won't spend much time on this, but these are a few examples of some hybrid projects for 2022 and 2023 deliveries. And as you can see, on the right-hand side of your screen there, these are rivaling the solar plus storage and wind plus storage projects are rivaling traditional energy projects. And I should say just one more thing about the cost curve is that we are expecting probably an 8 to 10% reduction in cost every year, year over year, out to about 2025. So the value of storage, this is really the trick about how to make storage work in the most cost-effective way. The values of storage are to make for a more reliable and resilient, more efficient, more sustainable, and more affordable grid for all. And the affordable part, as a former regulator, is super, super important to me and what makes it so attractive to me. But so, we started out with ancillary services in PJM market, right? So frequency regulation and response, load following, some curtailment, certainly congestion mitigation, although the value of that was not necessarily gotten, but Black Start and other ancillary services. And what we're finding now is that really the operational savings are also a part of that value stacking process where, you're seeing peak reduction, cost reductions, improved power quality, and DER firming. And then the next level really is reliability and resilience. The multiple services of being able to provide backup power, even as it's providing frequency regulation, being able to island in microgrid mode and have that reliability and that resilience. And also flexibility to firm these intermittent resources of solar and wind and to improve their capacity factors so that their cost per kilowatt hour of production is all the more low for consumers. A little bit about reliability and resilience, because it's one of my favorite topics of all time, sad to say, but there we have it. I'll start off by kind of defining what I mean, because I think there's not really a formal definition of resilience that's been widely accepted. So what I mean by it and what I think about it is the ability to withstand or to recover from external forces, right? Whereas reliability is kind of more in the everyday blue sky operations. And so energy storage can provide values for both reliability and resilience. And I've kind of laid this out in the structure of a short-term uncertainty and longer-term uncertainty. And that longer-term uncertainty really, really is where some of these other technologies come into play, like pumped hydropower or like compressed air systems that can go from 4 hours, 8 hours out to days of providing resilience. It's not without its barriers. I talked already a little bit about the value that storage isn't necessarily valued or compensated for that value that they're providing to the grid with storage flexibility. There have been quite some actions in the last 2018 was 3 years ago, 3 to 5 years in terms of regulatory reforms, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. There has been a lot of activity, but there's still a lot to go in terms of being able to value or compensate storage for its flexibility. And some of the solutions there really lie within the states. So setting targets, having incentives, making sure that rate design is synced to the capabilities that storage can provide to the distribution grid and to consumers. the second sort of major bucket of barriers is really the inability for storage to compete in grid planning, right? So that doesn't really, it's not really because people say, no, we're not going to include energy storage. It's just up until like maybe 5 years ago, it's not been a commercial product that people think about when they're going through the same thing they've gone, like, what's your 10-year plan, right? So you've got utilities and you've got commissions that are looking at their long-term resource planning. And 10 years ago, they weren't thinking about it. So it's really an educational exercise that we go through to make sure that storage is included in long-term resources planning at the distribution and the transmission level, that we're looking at how storage can play into complement renewable energy standards and also resource adequacy rules. And then the third bucket of barriers that we find ourselves working along is really ability to access the grid and access for all. And this goes to one of the very core principles of Energy Storage Association, where we believe strongly in competition, but that's competition, it's fair competition, right? So utilities should be able to own storage as well as independent power producers and third parties. But that means you have to have fair access to interconnection. You have to have fair access to data as to where that storage is most needed for helping congestion relief. We need a multiple use framework. There's a really cool pilot in Maryland, my home state, where they're looking out for multiple use frameworks between utilities and third parties. I'm happy to talk about that in the discussion frame, but I want to kind of move through this a little bit. And then just who should be able to own, as I mentioned before. So these are the kind of main barriers that we see for energy storage and why it's so important that we are active in the regulatory space, because as energy storage is an enabling technology, it is incredibly disruptive to the regulatory framework, both at the wholesale and the retail level. Value, competition, and access. So lots going on in policy. These are kind of some of our three main federal policy focus areas, and it straddles the, you'll see it straddles both legislation and regulation. So the standalone energy storage ITC, if you've seen anything from ESA, it includes, we want a standalone storage ITC. And what I mean by that is there's an investment tax credit. I'm sure all of you know about the investment tax credit for solar, which is awesome. And it helped to spur that market. We don't have that. We have a tax credit only for those solar projects that include storage, and that's storage at the same time, right? So there is not clarification from the IRS that you can add storage onto your project after you've already done the solar. You don't get an extra, you don't get the tax credit for that. So we're really pushing for storage to be able to support the grid itself, not just solar. So it should be able to support wind. It should be able to support solar. You should be able to get a tax credit if you add storage onto a solar plant later. And then I won't go too deeply into all of the others. I'm happy to provide these slides as materials, and I have my email at the end, so you're welcome to reach out to me at any time. But I do want to skip down to establishing market designs that compensate flexibility, because that's super important, and it is underway with FERC 841 and FERC Order 2222, or as I like to call it, 2x4, because it's way easier to say. FERC 841 really in early 2018 was a landmark rule from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that said, RTOs and ISOs, you must create market mechanisms for energy storage to be compensated for all the values that it provides to the grid, or that it is technically capable of providing to the grid. And what that means is they should be able to be compensated for the transmission values as well as the generation values, that it doesn't have to be stuck in one bucket of being a generation source or a transmission source. And then FERC 2222, again, 2x4 is way easier to say, that went into the distribution level. So it began to be an adjunct of FERC 841, but it said no matter where the energy storage, or frankly, it's actually broader than that. It's any distributed energy resource. No matter where that is on the grid, if it's at the distribution level, if it's behind the meter, it should be able to participate in wholesale markets. Now, there are some details around that, just not willy-nilly. You have to be accepted, and states have, of course, certain jurisdictions for being able to, for their authority to allow them to interconnect and all of the other things. But it opened the door for DERs to participate not only in retail markets, but in wholesale markets and be compensated. And that's really exciting too. So a lot of other really super exciting things that are going on, including end of the year, about $1.7 billion in research, development, and deployment money for energy storage programs. And that came in through the appropriations at the end of 2020. In the States, it is all about targets, incentives, and planning. I love buckets. So the targets, right now, we're in really good shape. There are 11,500 megawatts of storage across targets across 8 states. Virginia has the highest target that came in last year at 3,100 megawatt. They beat out New York, which I'm sure New York does not love that, but they beat out New York, which had up to then the largest target of 3,000 megawatts. Arizona is looking at it a little differently. They're looking at how it might help support or suppress their peak capacity. So their target is 5% of peak capacity. Incentives, there's about $1.1 billion across 6 states, including Massachusetts Clean Peak Standard. I'm happy to go into that if you have any questions about it, but also Maryland, which has its own state storage ITC. And so that's at the state level. On planning, in the last several years, 32 states now require long-term planning for utilities. 11,000 megawatts have been selected to date under these new planning processes. And I will say also the big 3 state energy and environment associations, NARUC, NASIO, and NASUCA, have all approved resolutions in the last couple of years related to energy storage development, and in saying, you got to use modeling that's sub-hourly and that's up to date and that includes storage as a resource when you're doing your long-term planning. So that's where we are today. And I wanted to spend just a tiny bit of time, just a tiny bit of time, we still have some time for questions, on where we see things going. Back in 2017, we established a goal, sort of a North Star for our industry, to get to 35 gigawatts by 2025. And earlier last year in 2020, we took a look at where we were with that goal. We looked at the progress we had made. We looked at some of the policy requirements that were needed in order to make that 35 by 25 goal. And we adjusted. We looked also then at where the renewable energy industry was going. And how regulatory reforms were being adopted. And we came out this summer with a combined target or vision, if you will, with the solar industry, the wind industry, and the hydropower industry, that said that with 50%, the renewable groups said they could get to 50% renewables by 2030 in this next decade. And in adjunct to that, the energy storage industry, alongside the National Hydropower Association, took a look at where we are in terms of batteries, thermal, mechanical storage, and pumped hydro. You'll see the pumped hydro there in green of what's existing as of 2019. And we saw where we could get 100 gigawatts of new energy storage by 2030. That includes about 16, 17 gigawatts of new pumped hydro, plus the rest is then the mechanical, the thermal, the other mechanical, the thermal, and the battery storage in the next decade. We're pretty excited about it, based on renewable energy penetrations, transportation electrification, and where we see that going, the regulatory reforms and the legislative support that we've seen both in the states and at the federal level. We think not only is 100 gigawatts of new energy storage on the grid probable, but it's probably necessary in order to support this 50%, 70%, going on to 100% by 2035 with this new administration moving in of renewables, or clean energy, I should say. It's necessary. We're going to need to use this to be to have a more resilient grid, more efficient grid, to support that sustainability and to make it more affordable for all. So I appreciate your time, and I think that's my last slide. Yeah, it is. Thank you so much. This is my email. So if anyone needs to reach out to me or anyone else on my team, I am more than happy to answer any questions. But for now, if we have a little time, I'd be happy to answer any questions now.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. We are getting some wonderful questions in the chat. Let me start with one from Tim Lindell, who says, I was surprised to see the value stack regarding reliability that you did not include capacity type values, but more resiliency and firming and shaping. California, for example, appears to be poised to rely on energy storage to a large extent to fix in 2021 the gaps in reliability we saw last year in 2020. To what degree do you see energy storage as a key tool to provide system and local capacity in the near and long-term future? And is California's move to rely on storage this summer a step towards overcoming some of the barriers you identified? And let me encourage all of our participants to put your questions in the Q&A, please, and we will watch those and forward them on. Thank you.
That's a great question. And honestly, it was an oversight only because I kind of assume the capacity. We are working through with FERC and some of the ISOs, the resource adequacy frameworks, to be able to collect revenues from that value that we're providing. And I think it's an incredibly important issue in terms of capacity or resource adequacy. In California last summer, if all of the projects that were in the queue had been installed, we wouldn't have had those outages this summer. It was about a 4-hour outage based on, again, an external problem with the generators going down, with the high heat. It was not necessarily sort of an everyday occurrence. But if that storage had been installed, it would have ridden through those numbers of hours that there were outages.
Thank you. We have another question here. Why do we still hear from some energy experts that battery storage is 3 times too expensive currently, or out of reach?
Yeah, because they're not using up-to-date numbers. The numbers are changing so quickly. You have to use the latest data. That's one of the things that the NARUC, National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, passed in their resolution in 2018, is make sure you're using at least the last year's, but certainly the most recently available commercial data on cost per kilowatt hour of storage. Otherwise, you're going to be pricing yourself out of using storage. And when you look at some of the planning processes, they're using 3, 4, 5-year-old data. And that's just not appropriate for energy storage with how fast the costs are coming down. When I first started at ESA in 2017, I had looked at the costs from like 2013 to 2017. They had come down 70% for battery storage in like 3 years. And then for behind the meter or commercial industrial, they had come down 80% in the last like 2 years. So imagine using data that's like that far behind. This is why people are saying it's too expensive, because they're not using the latest data.
And we face that same challenge in Wisconsin with renewable energy. I mean, if you're not following the industry, it's easy to assume that renewable energy is out of reach for your home or business. Because a lot of people.
So important. Yeah, that's why it's so important for the industry to get involved in these regulatory processes. I know it's boring, but they need that data, because commissions can only act on the evidence in front of them. They can't, it's got to be in that case.
Exactly. We have another question here, I think referring to your last slide. Can you give us, clarify again, a rough idea of the types of storage you expect to make up the grid storage in 2030 and later in 2050, you know, rough percentage of each type?
Sure. I don't have numbers for 2050, but I can tell you the direction. I would say by 2030, it's probably still going to be majority, meaning more than 50% of battery storage. There are different battery technologies that are coming out. Lithium ion right now today makes up about 98% plus of all of the battery technologies that are going on the grid. I expect, looking at what the queues are in the RTOs and ISOs and sort of in the planning process, I would expect that to follow through for quite a bit of this decade. But as we're going through this, that $1.7 billion that I mentioned, that's for a lot of long duration research and development. And so I can see a lot of these sorts of, you know, compressed air energy storage companies like Highview Power are really, really interesting. There are a lot of different technologies that will certainly benefit from the research and development to get those costs down so that they are more competitive, because we're looking at, you know, in the Northeast, for example, you're looking at resilience issues that go much further, much longer than 2, 3, and 4 hours. These are intraday and even seasonal resilience requirements that storage can help with, but only the long duration can. So out to 2030, I would say probably, I think where you're thinking like kind of 70–80% range will still be in the batteries. Out to 2050, we're going to be looking at a much more diverse set of technologies for energy storage that are on the grid.
That's very exciting. Can you tell us a little bit more about batteries? What steps are being taken to help with recycling of batteries and making advances in that field?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. We have, at ESA, we have started a group called the Corporate Responsibility Initiative to take on issues of recycling, yes, but also battery safety and operations. And the third issue is responsible sourcing. So these kind of 3 issues taken on with about 55, somewhere between 55 and 60 energy storage companies are taking on these issues. And on the issue of battery recycling, we put out a paper on where the state of battery recycling is today, which is very nascent. We looked at sort of where the market's going and what needs to be, and that means we need to work on this now. It's not an issue right now, but it will be by the end of the decade when we've got this 100 gigawatts of new storage back on. And we looked at sort of what are some of the barriers. And so we'll be coming out in the next month or so with some guidelines and also some templates for RFPs to include a requirement for recycling at the end of life. We think that's really important to help people in this new industry to set a standard, a minimum standard as to what needs to be done. We're also learning a lot from the transportation market. They're a little bit further along, right, with their battery recycling. And even so, like, this is kind of off the cuff, but we, we're thinking about, are there ways that you can use the transportation batteries and recycle them into stationary storage to even further decrease the cost? Because you only use like 80% of the life or 20% of the life of transportation batteries, and the use is much different. So there's a lot of research and development that's going into that. Sort of how can we, cross filter our industries to help each other make things more affordable.
That's very exciting. There's a follow-up question here from Jason McDuff of Green Penny. Can you tell us what the latest data is on the various life cycles of the energy storage options, and how quickly is their duration improving?
I don't think that I don't have those numbers at the top of my head, but I would love to follow up. I know that the durations are increasing, the life cycle is increasing. I don't have those numbers at the top of my head, and I hate to just make something up because that would be embarrassing if I was wrong. So if you'll give me his contact information, I'll get back to him.
We certainly can. I do want to mention before we get to the last couple of questions that this afternoon we're going to dig into some of these issues more specifically, electric vehicles and microgrids in particular. We also have a session comparing Wisconsin and Minnesota's policies. But for those of you who are excited about energy storage, please tune in this afternoon. So we've got a great question from Keith Riopel. He said, as you said, much storage was initially driven by the FERC regulation market in PJM. Does your association work on getting MISO and other ISOs to develop that FR market? What's your assessment of MISO in this regard?
Great question. Yes. So when FERC 841 came out, and so first of all, I should say we work in all the RTOs and ISOs with the exception of California, because there's a California Energy Storage Alliance that we partner with that works on all issues California. That's a whole another set in and of itself. But yes, we work in MISO, SPP, New York ISO, New England ISO, PJM. And so when FERC 841 came out and all the ISOs responded, we did a grade, we gave them scores, a scoring chart per RTO as to how we think they did. And we have representatives that are working within, working at MISO, or not, employees of, but that are working with MISO to make sure that things like resource adequacy requirements are put in properly and that adequately support the spirit of FERC 841. So we're very active in MISO. We have been for quite some time. So
great. Thank you. So that might actually be all we can do for questions for this session. In just a moment, we will take a 10-minute break where we encourage you to please step away from the computer, grab a cup of coffee or tea, and check your emails. And then please come right back to our event website. There'll be a link in the chat here for where to go if you need some support with that. At 10 o'clock, we're going to start sharp with our next panel. It's going to be opened with a recording from Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, and then our speakers, Jim Bullion of Renew Wisconsin, Tyler Huebner, our newest Public Service Commissioner and former Executive Director of Renew Wisconsin, Dan Ebert, yes, Dan Ebert of the Midwest Energy Research Consortium, and Joel Brennan, the State of Wisconsin Department of Administration, will be discussing Wisconsin's emerging policy on renewable energy. That'll be a great session, so please jump back at 10 o'clock for that. And I just want to extend a tremendous thank you to the Renew staff who put together a virtual summit under challenging circumstances, to Kelly Spees-Backman for a wonderful presentation, which I think has excited us for everything we're going to be learning over the rest of the summit, and to Invenergy for sponsoring this session, and all of our other wonderful sponsors. Thank you all for being here. Please enjoy your break. And if you're interested in these topics, I think this afternoon will really be exciting as well. So thank you for being here.
thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. It's great to see you. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.